Welcome to Story Planet, where every story is a journey of wonder. Get cozy, relax, and let the story gently unfold. Perfect for unwinding before the night, or whenever you need a moment of calm. The castle walls could not hold him. Prince Elias had lived within their towering stone embrace for as long as he could remember. As a child, they had seemed unbreakable. Fortresses of safety, boundaries that separated his world from the unknown beyond. But as he grew older, those same walls began to press inward, their edges too sharp, their silence too heavy. Duty. Expectation. The weight of a future already decided for him. At times, it felt as if he were a bird in a golden cage, given everything except the one thing he truly wanted. Freedom. Tonight, as the moon rose high, he could no longer resist the pull of the world beyond. Draped in a deep blue cloak, he moved through the corridors like a whisper, past sleeping guards and darkened halls. He had learned long ago how to slip away unnoticed, a skill gained from years of restless nights. His horse, a sleek black stallion named Orion, waited for him just beyond the gate. The moment Elias swung into the saddle, the weight on his chest lifted, as if he had finally exhaled after holding his breath for too long. The city faded behind him. The road stretched ahead, winding through the open fields and into the dense, whispering forest. The trees stood tall, their branches entwined overhead, filtering the moonlight into scattered silver patches on the ground. Fireflies drifted lazily through the air, their glow flickering like tiny stars caught between the leaves. This was where he belonged, not in the marble halls of the palace, but here, where the world breathed freely, untouched by crowns and thrones. His path was familiar. He had ridden these woods many times, seeking solace in their quiet embrace. Yet tonight something felt different. The air carried a stillness, a sense of something unseen watching from the depths of the trees. Then the path opened. A clearing lay before him, untouched, perfect, a lake shimmering like liquid silver beneath the moon. It was as if the night had gathered all its light and poured it into this single place. He had never seen it before. How could that be? He had traveled these woods since he was a boy, and yet this place, so serene, so quietly beautiful, felt as though it had existed outside of time, waiting for him to find it. Or perhaps waiting for something else. A ripple danced across the water's surface. Elias dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the soft grass. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. The lake reflected the sky so perfectly that, for a moment, it felt as if he stood at the edge of two worlds, the one he knew and the one that lived in dreams. Then a voice, soft as a sigh, barely more than a breath, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. "Prince Elias." His hand moved instinctively to the dagger at his belt, though there was no threat in the voice, only something delicate, something that curled around his name as though it had been spoken 100 times before. And then she stepped forward. A woman, emerging from the mist that curled at the lake's edge. Her gown billowed like water woven into fabric, white as the moon, moving without sound. Long silver hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the light in strands that shimmered like starlight. But it was her eyes that held him still, deep and dark, endless as the night sky, unfathomable, unreadable, and yet, somehow, familiar. "You should not be here," she murmured. Elias's breath caught, not because of fear, but because there was something about her, something that made the world around them feel impossibly distant. "You know my name," he said at last. A small smile touched her lips, a quiet secret hidden in the curve. "Yes." He waited for an explanation, but none came. The silence between them stretched, not empty, but full of something unspoken. He should have demanded to know who she was. He should have asked where she had come from, how she knew him, why she stood by this hidden lake as though she belonged to the night itself. But he did not. Instead, he stepped closer. The grass was damp beneath his boots. The lake remained perfectly still, as if even the water was holding its breath. "What is this place?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly, watching him with quiet amusement. "The lake has always been here," she said, "but few ever find it." He glanced at the water, at the way the stars reflected upon its surface without distortion. It was too still, too perfect, a mirror between worlds. "And you?" he asked. "Are you like the lake, here yet unseen?" For a moment she did not answer. Then softly, "I am Lyra." A simple name, and yet as it passed through the space between them, it settled into his chest, into something deeper than memory. He wanted to say more, wanted to ask why she had spoken his name as though she had always known it. But then she turned her gaze to the sky, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter. "It is late, Prince Elias." A gentle dismissal. He should have left, should have returned to the palace, to the world that was waiting for him. But he did not. Instead, he lingered, watching her as she stood by the water's edge, bathed in moonlight. Something about her, about this place, felt like a dream he did not want to wake from. And so he stayed. And as the night stretched on, the prince and the woman by the lake stood together, their fates quietly entwining like the silver light reflected on the water, neither knowing that this was only the beginning. The nights belonged to them. Each evening, as the last light of the sun faded behind the hills, Prince Elias returned to the lake, drawn by something stronger than reason, stronger than fear. And every night, Lyra was there. She stood by the water's edge, her gown flowing like mist over the grass, her silver hair catching the light of the stars. She spoke in a voice that felt like music, soft and lilting, threading through the air like a forgotten melody. They talked of everything, of the stars, of the moon, of the way the night felt different when they stood together. She listened as he spoke of the palace, of the heavy weight of duty, of a life where every decision was made for him before he could even breathe. "You do not belong in a cage," she murmured one evening, watching the reflection of the sky ripple in the lake's surface. He looked at her, searching her face. "Then where do I belong?" She turned her gaze to him, and in the silence that followed, he wished she would say, "Here, with me." But she did not. Instead, she smiled, softly, knowingly, as if she held a truth he could not yet understand. And then, like always, the night passed too quickly. Every dawn, as the first light of morning touched the horizon, she began to fade. It was not sudden. It was not harsh. It was as if the world itself pulled her away, drawing her back into the shadows of the night. No matter how tightly he held on to the moment, she always slipped through his fingers like mist. And he did not know why. Elias could no longer ignore the questions that burned inside him. One evening, after another night spent beside the lake, he sought the only person he believed could offer him answers, Madame Evora, the old healer who had served the palace long before he was born. Her cottage sat deep in the woods, hidden from the eyes of the court. The walls were lined with dried herbs and hanging charms, whispers of old magic lingering in the air. She looked up as he entered, her sharp eyes narrowing. "You seek something beyond what you understand, don't you, young prince?" Elias hesitated, then nodded. "I have met someone," he admitted. "A woman. She only appears beneath the moon, and when the sun rises, she is gone." Ivora's hands, aged and lined with years of knowledge, moved over a wooden bowl, crushing dried petals into fine dust. She said nothing at first, then softly she murmured, "She is of the moon's embrace." Elias frowned. "What does that mean?" The old woman sighed, sitting down across from him. There are spirits in this world, Elias. Some are bound to the land, some to the wind, some to the endless tides of time itself, and some are bound to the night. His breath caught. You mean? She is not mortal, Evora said simply. She belongs to the realm of stars and shadows, a being neither fully of this world nor the next. Elias sat back, his heart pounding. He had suspected Lyra was different. He had felt it in the way she moved, in the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath when she spoke. But to hear it confirmed, she was never meant to be seen, Evora continued. But someone has pulled her from her world and into yours. Elias did not need to ask who, he already knew. I did, he whispered. The healer's gaze softened. You have bound your fates together, Prince, and now there is a choice before you. Do you let her go as the world intended, or do you try to hold on to something that was never meant to stay? Elias clenched his fists. The thought of never seeing Lyra again was unbearable. She had become a part of him, woven into the fabric of his nights. He could not let her go. There must be a way, he said. Evora watched him carefully, then nodded, as if she had expected this answer. There is an ancient ritual, she said, one that can pull her from the realm of the night and anchor her into the waking world. Elias's heart surged with hope. Tell me. The old woman hesitated. If you do this, she warned, Lyra will become mortal. She will be able to walk beneath the sun, to live, to breathe as you do. But, Evora's voice dropped to a whisper, she will not remember you. The air in the cottage grew heavier, the weight of the words settling deep in Elias's chest. If she crosses into your world, Evora continued, the memories she holds of her time in the moonlight will fade. She will forget the lake. She will forget the stars. She paused, then added, almost sorrowfully, she will forget you. Elias felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Could he do it? Could he bring Lyra into his world, knowing she would not remember the nights they had shared? Would she still smile at him the way she did now? Would she still look at him with the same quiet knowing, the same depth that made his heart ache? Or would she be a stranger? Evora placed a small vial of silver dust on the table before him. If you choose this path, she said, bring her to the lake on the next full moon. Scatter this into the water and speak her name. The choice will no longer be yours alone. She must step into the light willingly. Elias stared at the vial, his thoughts unraveling like thread. Was love still love if it was forgotten? Would his heart recognize her, even if hers did not remember him? He did not know the answer. But as the night deepened, he knew one thing. He could not bear to lose her, even if it meant she would never know what they once had. Even if it meant he would have to fall in love with her all over again. And so, as the stars watched in silence, Prince Elias made his choice. The nights felt shorter now. Elias had always dreaded the first rays of morning, the way the golden light reached across the horizon and stole Lyra away. But now, as the full moon drew closer, each night with her felt more precious, more fragile, like glass waiting to crack beneath his hands. She did not know. He had not told her what was coming, nor the choice he would place before her. Because if she knew, she might not stay, and he was not ready to lose her. Not yet. So, he let the nights unfold as they always had. They walked by the water's edge, their hands brushing but never fully meeting. They sat beneath the willow tree, speaking in hushed voices as if afraid to wake the world. And sometimes they simply sat in silence, their hearts speaking in ways words never could. But in the quiet, Elias could feel the weight of the secret pressing against his ribs, the knowledge that everything was about to change. And once it did, there would be no going back. The night of the full moon arrived. Elias stood by the lake before Lyra appeared, the vial of silver dust heavy in his palm. He had spent hours staring at it, his thoughts a storm of doubt. Would she still love him, even if she forgot? Would she still smile at him the same way? Would her heart recognize his, even if her mind did not? He did not know, and yet he could not bear to let her fade into the night forever. The stars shimmered overhead, casting their pale glow upon the water. And then, like mist weaving itself into a shape, she was there. Lyra. She looked at him and smiled, stepping forward. "You were waiting for me." "Always," he murmured. She did not know how much truth was in that single word. Tonight she was more beautiful than ever, wrapped in silver light, her eyes reflecting the endless expanse of the sky. But there was something else in them too. A knowing, a quiet sadness. "Elias," she said softly, tilting her head. "Something is different tonight." He swallowed, his fingers tightening around the vial. "Yes." She stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch his face, but stopping just short. "I can feel it," she whispered. "The air, the stars, even the lake. It's as if everything is waiting." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something in her gaze that made his breath catch. Fear. She already knew. Maybe she had known all along. Elias exhaled shakily. There was no hiding it now. "Lyra," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found a way." Her lips parted, her expression unreadable. "A way?" "A way to keep you here," he said. "To bring you into my world. To make you—" He stopped himself. The word felt wrong on his tongue. Mortal. She flinched, just slightly, but enough for him to see it. "You would take me from the night," she said slowly, "and place me in the day." Elias reached for her hands, gripping them tightly. "I would give you a life, Lyra. A real life. One where you don't fade with the dawn. One where you don't have to disappear." She looked down at their joined hands, her fingers trembling. "But I would not remember," she said softly. His heart clenched. "No." She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. When she looked at him again, her eyes were filled with something raw, something that made the stars above them seem dim in comparison. "You would risk everything," she whispered, "for a love I may never remember." Elias swallowed hard. "Yes." Lyra let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but it was laced with sorrow. "Foolish prince," she murmured, shaking her head. He smiled, but it was bittersweet. "I would rather be a fool with hope than a king without you." She fell silent. For a long time they only stood there, the night wrapping around them like a fragile cocoon. Then, finally, Lyra spoke. "What must I do?" Elias hesitated, then slowly pulled the vial from his cloak. "This," he said, "this will free you." She reached out, her fingers ghosting over the glass. "And when I step into the light—" Her voice faltered. He gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I will find you again," he promised, "no matter what it takes." Lyra's eyes shimmered, not with moonlight, but with unshed tears. "You cannot promise what fate has already written," she whispered. Elias only smiled. "Watch me." He opened the vial. The silver dust swirled in the wind, dancing across the water's surface like fallen stars. The lake began to glow, its reflections shifting, bending, as if the world itself was unraveling. The air trembled. The trees whispered. The night held its breath. Lyra stepped forward. Her bare feet touched the water, and the glow rose around her, wrapping her in light. She turned to Elias one last time. "If I forget you," she whispered, "will you remind me?" His voice was steady. "Always." She smiled, a small, sad smile, and then closed her eyes. The light consumed her. For a moment she was weightless, floating in a sea of silver, her form flickering like the stars above. Then she was gone. The lake stilled. The air settled. The night exhaled. Elias stood alone beneath the stars, his heart aching with the emptiness left behind. Lyra was gone. And when the sun rose, she would awaken somewhere in his world, with no memory of the love they had shared. But he would find her. He had to, because some loves were written in the stars, and others were written in the soul. The sun rose, and she was gone. Elias had never known a morning so empty. The lake stood silent, its silver glow lost in the golden light of dawn. The willow tree cast long shadows across the grass, the wind carried no whispers, and the water reflected nothing but a sky that no longer held the moon. He had done it. Lyra was in his world now, but she did not know him. She did not remember his name, his voice, or the nights they had shared beneath the stars. And yet, somewhere, she was breathing in the morning air for the first time, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin, walking through a world she had never truly touched before. He had given her a life. Now he had to find her. Days passed, then weeks. Elias searched the kingdom relentlessly. Every morning he rode through the villages, through the markets, through the gardens where the nobility strolled. He looked into every unfamiliar face, hoping to find even the faintest echo of her. At night, he stood at the palace balcony, staring at the sky, wondering if the stars still whispered to her in ways she could not understand. He tried to convince himself that it would be enough, just knowing she was here, living beneath the same sky. But his heart would not let him rest. It was not enough to know she existed. He needed her to remember. One evening, nearly a month after the night at the lake, Elias found himself wandering the palace gardens. He had searched every corner of the kingdom, yet fate had led him back here, back to the place he had always belonged, though it had never felt like home. The garden was quiet, the air thick with the scent of roses and lavender. Fireflies drifted lazily in the twilight, their glow soft and fleeting. And then he saw her, standing beneath the willow tree, her fingers trailing over the petals of a white lily. His breath caught. Lyra. She was different now. Her silver hair had darkened to the color of the sky just before dawn. Her gown was no longer woven from moonlight, but simple linen. And yet, it was her. Elias took a step forward, but something stopped him. She did not look at him the way she once had. There was no recognition in her eyes, no quiet smile meant only for him. She was just a girl in a garden, admiring the flowers, lost in a world that did not know the secrets of the night. His heart clenched. He had known this would happen. He had known she would forget. And yet, seeing it, standing before her and realizing she was a stranger to him, was more painful than he had imagined. But then, as he turned to leave, she spoke. "I feel as though I have been here before." Elias froze. Her voice. It was the same. Soft like a lullaby, laced with something distant, something just out of reach. Slowly he turned back to her. She was still staring at the lily, her fingers brushing over the petals as if they held the answers she could not find. "There are moments," she murmured, "when I close my eyes and see a lake bathed in silver light." Elias's heart pounded. She did not remember him, but she remembered the moon. "Do you believe in things you cannot explain?" he asked, his voice careful, measured. She turned to him for the first time. Her eyes were different now, lighter, touched by the sun. But when she looked at him, there was something there, something stirring beneath the surface. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I feel as though I should." Elias stepped closer, closing the space between them. "I once heard a story," he said softly, "about a woman who belonged to the night and a man who could not let her go." She tilted her head, listening. "They met beneath the stars," he continued, "by a lake no one else could find. And though they were never meant to be, they found each other again and again." Her brow furrowed, as if she were grasping at something just beyond reach. "That sounds familiar," she whispered. Elias swallowed, his voice thick with emotion. Perhaps some stories are not written in books, he said. Perhaps they are written in us. She looked at him then, really looked at him. A flicker of something passed through her gaze. Not memory, but something deeper, recognition. She lifted a hand to her chest, pressing her fingers over her heart. I don't know why, she murmured, but when I look at you, I feel as though I have been waiting for you. Elias closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling the breath he had been holding for what felt like an eternity. Perhaps she did not remember the nights by the lake. Perhaps she did not remember the promises whispered beneath the stars. But she had found him, and somehow, someway, her heart still knew his. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers with the gentleness of a memory just beginning to return. Then let's begin again, he said. Lyra hesitated for only a moment. Then slowly she placed her hand in his, and as the stars watched from above, a love that had been lost to the night began anew. Thank you for listening. If you liked the story, consider liking and sharing it with your loved ones. They might need a moment of calm too. For daily stories, subscribe if you haven't already. Good night, and sweet dreams from Story Planet.